This happened back in 2016. I took a solo road trip to a remote forest a few hours away from my place. There was a long hike leading up to an old abandoned fire lookout that I was really eager to explore. I should mention, it was technically illegal to enter or camp inside the structure. It hadn't been maintained in years and could have been unstable. I'd done some research online and most people said it seemed all right. But the most recent post I found about it was from 4 years earlier, so I had no real idea what shape it was in when I got there. I eventually found a narrow ditch along the roadside to park in. I grabbed my backpack, loaded with enough gear for 2 days, and started my hike. Trails to places like this are usually unofficial, so I brought a handheld satellite GPS to help guide me. Still, I was pretty much just cutting through untouched forest the whole way. The hike took about 5 hours from where I parked. The deeper I went into the woods, the thicker and rougher the terrain became. I was really counting on that fire lookout still being intact enough to stay the night in. If not, I'd have to find another decent spot nearby to pitch my tent. After several exhausting hours of hiking, I finally made it. I caught a glimpse of the lookout poking through the treetops. As I got closer, it looked surprisingly decent. The paint was long faded, but the structure looked like it was still holding strong. I tested the support beams and they felt solid, so I decided to give the metal ladder a try. It creaked with every step, but it felt steady. When I reached the top, I was blown away by the view. I could see nothing but endless forest stretching in every direction. No roads, no buildings, no lights, just trees. Inside, the lookout was tiny, maybe 160 square feet. It wasn't one of those big fancy towers that get turned into Airbnbs. It had a rotting bed in one corner, an old wooden desk in another, and large, grimy windows lining the walls. Not much else to look at, so I set my bag down, rolled out my mattress and sleeping bag, and heated up a quick meal on my camping stove. As the sun went down, I stepped back out onto the ledge. The sunset was absolutely breathtaking, probably one of the best I'd ever seen. But the moment felt like it slipped away too fast, and soon it was pitch black. The clouds rolled in thick, hiding the moon and stars, leaving no light at all. With not much else to do, I stayed seated on the ledge for a while longer. Maybe an hour into the night, I saw something strange down in the trees. A light. But it wasn't a flashlight or lantern. It had an orange flickering glow, like a torch or small fire. It weaved through the trees not far from the tower. The odds of someone else being out there at the same time as me were incredibly low. This place wasn't even on a marked trail. And why would someone walk around at night in the wilderness with a torch? I watched the light drift through the forest until it disappeared behind some trees. I waited another 30 or 40 minutes, but it never came back into view. I stayed there, listening to the quiet of the night. Eventually, the wind picked up and the cold set in. I stood up, ready to head back inside, and gave the forest one last glance. That's when I saw someone. They were standing on the ground, just below the fire lookout in the clearing between the tower and the forest's edge. It looked like they were staring right up at me. "Hello?" I called out, unsure what else to say. They didn't move or respond. For about 10 or 15 seconds, we just stared at each other. Then, they raised their hands slowly, like were acknowledging me or maybe apologizing, then turned around and walked back into the woods. No flashlight, no torch, nothing. It was one of the eeriest moments of my life. But weirdly, I convinced myself they were probably just another hiker, maybe someone who also knew about the lookout and was checking if it was occupied. Still, why they didn't speak or use a normal light, I'll never understand. I stayed outside a little longer, but once I was sure they were gone, I went back in and got into my sleeping bag to warm up. It was tough to fall asleep with the wind howling and the wooden beams creaking underneath me, but eventually I drifted off. It's hard to say how much time passed, but I was jolted awake later in the night. The wind had died down and it was still pitch black outside. I opened my eyes, confused, and then I heard it. The soft, metallic creak of the ladder outside. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again. Step by step, someone was climbing up the ladder. I had no way to tell how far up they were, but I could hear the hinges at the top groaning quietly with each step. I unzipped my sleeping bag and stood up, my heart pounding. I grabbed my backpack, stepped onto the ledge, and tried to steady my breathing. Over the next 20 seconds, the creaking got faster and louder, like whoever it was had picked up their pace, until it just stopped. I stood frozen, listening for any sound. Nothing. So I slowly edged around the walkway, peering toward the opening where the ladder reached the platform. No one was there. I crept closer, heart racing, and leaned over the edge to look down. The ladder was empty. I stood there in total disbelief, paralyzed between fear and confusion, when I suddenly heard footsteps thudding behind me on the wooden walkway. I spun around just in time to catch a dark figure darting between the windows on the opposite side. I didn't wait. I climbed onto the ladder and started down as fast as I could. The rungs were slick, and my hands were trembling from the adrenaline, but I didn't stop. Halfway down, I glanced up and saw a head peek over the railing above. I kept going, slipping at one point but managing to hold on. When I finally hit the ground, I took off into the woods. I don't even know why I had the sense to grab my backpack before stepping out, but it was the best decision I made that night. With my flashlight and GPS, I hiked through the dark forest for hours until I made it back to my car. As far as I know, I wasn't followed. I drove away and never looked back. I had planned a quiet weekend camping trip by a small lake. Nothing fancy, just some time in nature to unwind, nothing more than that. The first day went exactly how I hoped. I got there, set up my tent, and spent the day relaxing. The spot was pretty remote. There was a narrow trail leading in, but it wasn't marked on any maps or apps. Honestly, I think all of the locals even know this place exists. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid, and over the years, I've returned on my own quite a few times. Not once had I seen another person out there. No people, no signs of campsites, no old trash, nothing. It was always completely empty. On what was supposed to be my third day, I decided to walk the perimeter of the lake a few times and just enjoy the peace and quiet. I probably circled it 5 or 6 times throughout the day. Everything was calm, until one lap around, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Footprints in the dirt just at the edge of the trees. I'd walked that same path several times already, and I was positive they hadn't been there earlier. The prints were really clear, hard to miss. And the weirdest part? They weren't shoe prints. They were bare feet. No boots, no sandals, just straight up human footprints without any shoes. And this part of the lake didn't even have easy access to the water, so it wasn't like someone just kicked off their shoes for a swim. Plus, I hadn't seen or heard anyone nearby the whole time. Seeing those prints gave me a bad feeling. Why hadn't I noticed anyone around before? Were they watching me and hiding out of sight? It was hard not to feel a little paranoid. From the way the prints looked, it seemed like someone had walked out from the woods to the lake, stood there for a while, and then turned around and walked straight back into the forest. And the trail led pretty far in. I wasn't about to follow those tracks. I headed back to my campsite instead. Even then, I kept glancing toward the tree line around the lake, half expecting someone to be standing there, staring. But I never saw a thing. As the sun started going down, the uneasy feeling came back stronger. Something about those footprints wasn't sitting right with me. Knowing someone else had been nearby, and might still be, it wasn't comforting. Once it got dark, I built the fire up a bit more and sat close to it. I tried to keep my mind off everything, but that was easier said than done. Part of me thought I had every reason to be nervous, but another part kept telling me I was probably just overthinking it. Then, a while into the night, I heard footsteps coming from the woods. I froze, facing the direction of the sound. It was more than one person. It sounded like 2 people slowly making their way toward my campsite. I stared toward the noise until they finally stepped just into the glow of the firelight. It was a man and a woman. They stood side by side, just far enough back that I couldn't really make out their faces, just silhouettes. I couldn't tell their ages or anything, really. "Can I help you?" I asked. As soon as I said that, the woman suddenly turned and bolted back into the trees without a word. But the man didn't react at all. He stayed right where he was, not moving, not even glancing in her direction. Just standing there. That's when I looked down and saw he had no shoes on. That's when I knew these were the people who had left the barefoot prints. I asked again if he needed something, but he didn't answer. He just slowly turned around and walked back into the woods without another word. At that point, I was completely freaked out. It was hands down the creepiest, most unsettling thing I'd ever experienced. It honestly didn't feel real. I didn't wait around to find out what would happen next. I immediately started packing up. Luckily, I didn't bring much, and my gear was quick to tear down. Within a few minutes, everything was packed in my bag. I had no idea where those two went, and I sure didn't want to still be there if they came back. I knocked over the remaining firewood to let the flames burn out and quickly started making my way down the trail. The hike back to my truck was nearly 2 hours long. For the first 15 minutes, I was jumpy, constantly checking behind me. But the farther I walked, the calmer I started to feel. That was until I hit the 50-minute mark. The woods had gone completely silent, not a single sound. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of running footsteps in the distance, maybe 80 feet away. Someone was running. I couldn't see them, but I could definitely hear them. I kept walking, a little faster this time. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time on the other side of the trail. Short bursts of running, but always at a distance, always just out of sight. And it was quiet, too quiet, like they were barefoot again. And I had a horrible feeling it was the same two people from earlier. If they were following me this far into the woods, I don't even want to think about what they were planning. Every so often, I'd hear them, short sprints through the forest, switching sides, always keeping their distance. It was like they were stalking me, toying with me. That hike out of there was honestly the most terrifying experience of my life. Somehow, though, I made it back to my truck. I jumped in, locked the doors, and got the hell out of there. I wish I had answers, who those people were, what they were doing out there. But I don't. Sometimes, I even wonder if they were alive, or something else entirely. I really don't know. And to be honest, I'm not sure I want to. I've never gone back. I'm a 24-year-old woman from northern Arizona. This happened a couple of years back. At the time, I was living in a small camper van exploring the West Coast. There are all kinds of people who choose the van life. Everyone has their own way of doing it. For me, I always avoided big cities. I preferred stopping in small towns for supplies, then finding quiet backcountry spots to camp in between. My favorite places were deep in the woods, far from people. That's where I felt safest, and honestly, where I enjoyed van life the most. In my mind, it was far less risky to be tucked away in the middle of a forest than trying to stealth camp in some sketchy city parking lot. Sure, it could still feel spooky at night, but at least I knew I was alone. That week, I was slowly making my way between two larger cities in Washington. I stuck to the back roads, stopping for a few days at a time to rest. On this particular day, I found a dirt trail off the main road and followed it deep into the forest. There were a few pull-off areas, all of them empty and overgrown. It didn't seem like anyone had used this trail in a while. I kept going, hoping to find a bigger, more private spot, and I did. At the end of the trail, there was a wide clearing. It wasn't scenic, just surrounded by tall trees, but it was peaceful and private. There was even a fire ring made of stones in the center. I parked, leveled out the van, and settled in. Since it was springtime in Washington, it had been raining almost daily. There wasn't much to do outside, so I opened the van's side door for some fresh air while cooking a simple meal on my propane stove. The sun was setting, but I still had a few hours before bedtime. Over the next half hour, it got darker and the rain picked up. I shut the side door to keep things dry, but cracked open one of the rear windows near the bed to let in some air. I climbed under the blankets and watched a show on my laptop. That's when something odd happened. I noticed the glare on my screen, like a light reflecting through the open window. It only lasted a second and then disappeared. Not like it moved away, but like someone switched it off. I quickly turned around and looked out the window, but I couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black outside, and the rain was coming down hard. I had no idea how far away the light came from, or what it even was. Since I was on a back trail that had a few empty spots along the way, I figured it might have been another camper. Maybe their headlights somehow cut through the trees and hit my window, and then they shut the vehicle off. The strange thing was, the light didn't come from the direction of the road I drove in on. Behind that window? Nothing but thick woods. I briefly considered if there was another path I hadn't noticed, but with the storm and the darkness, there wasn't much I could do to investigate. I turned back around and kept watching my show, glancing at the windows now and then, wondering if I'd see something or someone. But with the rain hammering the roof, it was impossible to know if I was really hearing anything or just imagining it. Every time I peeked out, though, I didn't spot a thing. Eventually, around 10 or 11 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I shut off all the lights, closed the windows, pulled down the shades, and climbed into bed. The inside of the van was almost completely dark. Usually, I fall asleep pretty fast, but that night, I just couldn't settle down. The rain kept getting heavier. After a while, thunder started rumbling. It was so loud that it drowned out everything else. Sleeping became almost impossible. About 2 hours in, between crashes of thunder and the downpour, I heard something outside. It was faint but distinct, like someone had stepped on a branch. It sounded like fast footsteps just outside the van. The moment I heard it, everything else went silent again. I stared out the back window, but it was too dark to see anything. Still, I had that gut feeling, like someone out there was watching me. I pulled the window cover down and sat there in silence, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But then, I heard a voice. It was a man's voice, low, like he was whispering loudly to someone else. I stayed perfectly still, frozen, terrified to move. I didn't dare lift the window covers again. If I could hear them, they could definitely see me. They probably already knew someone was inside the van. That's what made it even worse. A couple minutes passed, no more talking, just the relentless sound of the storm, before I heard something press up against the sliding door of the van. It sounded like plastic bending slightly. Someone was leaning on the door. Then came the knock. A few seconds passed, and then another knock. Not loud, not angry, just enough to let me know they were still there. I didn't respond. I didn't even breathe loudly. I figured maybe if I stayed quiet, they wouldn't know if I was alone or how many people were inside. I hoped that uncertainty would keep them from trying anything. Minutes crawled by as the knocking continued, steady and persistent. No one spoke. They had to be soaked by now, and there's no way they could see clearly in that weather. Then, finally, a voice called out, "Sheriff's Department, open up." The second I heard that, I knew it wasn't real. Why wouldn't they have said that right away? The knocking kept going. They started saying different things, all along the same lines. That they were a cop, that I needed to open the door. But it all sounded too desperate, too forced. I slowly lifted one of the window covers and peeked out. All I could make out was a shadowy figure moving near the door. From what I could tell, he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform. No badge, no gear. I was certain now, this wasn't a cop. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide what to do. The knocking was getting more aggressive. My heart was racing. I made a split-second decision. I was going to try to drive away. As quietly as I could, I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. Just then, I heard the crunch of multiple footsteps racing up toward the van. I hit the gas. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a person at my side window, but I didn't stop. The van lurched forward onto the muddy trail. Thankfully, I didn't get stuck. As I drove down the road, I never saw another vehicle. No car, no truck, nothing, which only made their presence even more terrifying. When I finally got to town, I filed a report with the local sheriff's office. Unsurprisingly, they told me no deputies had been in that area that night. I never heard anything back. To this day, I don't know who those people were or what they wanted. But I do know one thing. If I hadn't acted when I did, things could have gone very, very wrong.